Empathy. It's a word that has become very common in our daily language. In fact, I was looking at a chart that looked at the frequency of the use of the word empathy from the 1950s, I think it was, until now. And it's pretty much a straight line jump up. So we talk about it a lot, we say it a lot. Do we actually know what empathy is? What it means to be empathetic? Or are you an empath? Today, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about what empathy is and isn't. Hi, I'm Sarah Engler, an LDS therapist, coach, and author with more than 25 years of experience supporting women in improving their emotional and mental health. Please keep in mind that the information shared here is for educational and personal development purposes only. If you're dealing with significant mental health issues, please reach out to a local mental health therapist. Okay, so let's start with the definition. What is empathy? Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person. Simply put, that's what empathy is. Why does empathy matter? Why are we talking about it so much? Why do we care about being empathetic? Well, let me ask you to consider maybe some opposing experiences. When was the last time you experienced being with someone, having a conversation, and genuinely feeling like you were understood, you were heard, you were seen? What was that experience like for you? Contrast that experience with an experience where maybe you didn't feel seen or heard or understood. That's empathy. That's what we're talking about. Empathy is all about creating deeper connections with people that we care about. That's why empathy matters. Okay. Now, for most of us, empathy is not something we come knowing how to do with the ability to empathize. The good news is it is something you can learn. It is a skill that you can develop. And there are 4 parts to being able to empathize. So it requires that you are able to take someone else's perspective, putting yourself in someone else's shoes, stepping outside of yourself. That is an important part of being able to be empathetic. Staying out of judgment. So when you are judgmental towards another person and what they're experiencing, that will keep you from being empathetic, from being present for what they're experiencing. Recognizing what is going on for the other person emotionally. Now, you may have an idea, depending on your relationship with this person, you may be able to guess, have a good idea about what's going on for them, or you may need to ask, and that's okay. Being empathetic doesn't mean you automatically know. Sometimes it's really important to ask. What is it you're feeling? What is it that's going on for you? And then 4th is, once you understand what's going on for them, you can communicate that understanding in some way. So these are the 4 parts that are necessary to being empathetic in our relationships. So one way that I'll talk about this is empathy is your ability to hold space for someone else's experience. Empathy does not require you to have the same experience as the other person. So I think sometimes we don't feel adequately prepared, or we don't know what to say because we haven't been through what someone else is experiencing. Empathy is connecting with the emotion of what they're experiencing, not the experience itself. And we've all experienced sadness, loneliness, hurt, rejection, fear. So even if we haven't experienced the same thing that they're going through, we can still show up empathetically by being aware of and connecting with the emotion. So empathy doesn't require that you've had the same experience. It's all about connecting with that emotion. And all of us have had those emotional experiences. Empathy is not. This is just as important as what empathy is, because I think we can get caught up in some bad boundaries, frankly, when it comes to being empathetic. Being empathetic is not taking ownership for the other person's experience. So when we're practicing empathy, we can understand, join with, create space for the other person's experience. But we also have separation of. We are not taking ownership of what their experience is. And this is really important with painful or heavy emotional experiences. Empathy is not about fixing the other person's emotional experience. It's allowing them to have their experience, not needing to shift it or change it. And empathy isn't necessarily even about agreeing with what their experience is. You may not really understand why they're having the reaction they're having. You may not think they should be, and that's where you want to be careful because that's stepping into judgment. But you don't need to agree with, to be empathetic to their emotional experience. So it's important to keep these pieces in mind when practicing empathy in a healthy way. So there are some really important differences between sympathy and empathy. Let's talk about a couple. So sympathy can be a feeling of pity for. Sympathy can be, man, it's a relief that I'm not dealing with that. I don't have that problem. Of course, we'd never say this out loud, but when that's our sense, that's more of a sympathetic response. I can see them struggling. I can see them having a hard time, and I can even feel badly for them. And I'm really glad that that's not what's going on for me. Sympathy will lead to disconnection, distancing ourselves from other people, rather than empathy, which can lead to deeper connections. So I love visuals, and Brene Brown talks about a visual with empathy and sympathy. And so I think it's significant to visualize the difference. When you're expressing sympathy, you can visualize or see yourself as across the room from the other person who is experiencing their struggle. I see you over there. I know you're having a hard time, and I'm sure glad I'm not over there with you. That's just a visual way to sort of represent what sympathy is. Again, I can express to you, I can say to you, sorry you're having such a hard time, but I'm really glad that I'm not over there with you. Empathy, when visualizing empathy, visualize that you are next to someone who is struggling. Brene talks about it as someone who's down in the hole. Now, you don't want to jump down in the hole with them. Sometimes that's what we think empathy means, is I have to get down in there with them to help them figure it out and get them out. Don't jump down in the hole with them. You're there with them, and you've certainly had times where you've been in that hole, where you've been having those emotional experiences. You're right there with them, and you're supporting them in having their experience. So that's just a different way to visualize when I'm expressing sympathy versus I'm expressing empathy. Okay, so this week I'm going to invite you to practice developing your capacity for empathy. So pick one of these four requirements, this is the wrong word, but one of these four pieces that is necessary for expressing empathy. So practice taking perspective. If it's helpful, focus on one relationship with your spouse, with a child, a friend, a coworker. Focus on one relationship and practice taking perspective, putting yourself in their shoes. Practice staying out of judgment. Their experience is their experience. They get to have their experience. Practice naming what emotion is present for them. And again, if you don't know, that's okay. Ask. It's better to ask than assume and be wrong. And then practice communicating. I'm so sorry this is a difficult time, or I understand why this is so painful for you. So practice communicating that you understand what's going on for them emotionally. If you find yourself having a hard time being empathetic towards other people, there are some common things that might be getting in the way. So it'd be important to consider, how are you feeling? If you're feeling scared or afraid, if you're feeling angry, if you're feeling hurt, these emotions will definitely get in the way of your ability to be empathetic with someone else's experience. So notice if that's happening for you. Thanks for hanging out. Until next time, remember, you are so much more than good enough.